So what we're going to do here is you've already in the preliminary lecture heard about the syllabus, the important dates, the assignments and things. A couple more things I want to mention here just to get us going here is that in chapter 1 of the book, it talks about scientific notation and the SI system of units. The SI system of units, that's the international system. SI stands for French for international system. I don't actually try saying that because if I do pronounce that, it just like flips out anybody that actually speaks French because my pronunciation is terrible for French. And so what we're going to do here is you need to know that. Now that's the kilograms and meters and kilometers and sort of things. And you need to know scientific notation along with that. And the reason this is important is that we have a meter, and a meter is a certain length here. Originally, it was 1/10,000,000th of the distance between the North Pole to the equator, but we redefined it since then. A kilometer, a kilometer, is 1,000 meters. And so you would write that as 1,000, like 6 kilometers would be 6,000 meters, or 6 times 10 to the third. A mega is a million. A giga is a billion. So if you have planets that are billions of kilometers away, then rather than writing a huge number like that, we'd say like something times 10 to the 9. Okay, or a micro or a nano. A nano is 10 to the minus 9. Rather than writing a number, like with a whole bunch of decimals like that, we'd write it like this. You need to learn how to enter that into your calculator. So your calculator needs to be one that actually does scientific notation. So you need to look in the manual and the instructions for your particular calculator how to use it to do this, because not all calculators enter this the exact same way. You want to do it using the method of scientific notation. There's a button for that. Don't just enter something and then multiply times 10 to the power, because if you do it that way, the calculator thinks you're trying to do something different than writing it in scientific notation, and it actually treats the numbers differently. And so you might or might not get the right answer if you do it that way. So again, look how to use your calculator for scientific notation. I can't just say do it a certain way because different calculators do it differently. Casios do it differently than TIs do it. Even 2 different types of Casios will do it differently. So you need to just look up for your calculator. Astronomy is a science. Science has a particular method to it. And that's very important because you find a lot of people don't understand how science works, which is part of the reason we have a problem with the pandemic and people not listening to scientists right now. But what happens is in science, you just kind of, keep your eyes and ears open, you observe things, and you see something, and you try to figure out how it works. And so what you do is you create a hypothesis. The hypothesis is your idea or your guess as to how it works. The hypothesis is not just completely out of thin air. It's based on what you already understand and what has already been explained and what's already works. So you build on what has come before. You don't just like throw something out there and say, oh, well, I'm just going to ignore everything that came before, so I think I'm doing better than all the other experts. So you build on it. Your hypothesis is your idea. That idea is not a scientific idea unless it can be somehow tested. It's tested through an experiment or an observation. So you may have like an idea, for example, that gravity makes things fall down. And so your hypothesis is you drop something and it falls. Okay, and so you drop it multiple times and it falls. If you drop something and it doesn't fall, then you have to explain, well, what went wrong? Like if you have a helium balloon and you drop it, it goes up instead of going down, so you need to explain about buoyancy and how that works. Now that's doing an experiment where you're actually controlling things. Sometimes in astronomy or in some sciences, you can't really do the experiment. You can't say, okay, I have an idea about how planets form. You can't go out and build planets in the laboratory and test it. But what you can do is look out into space where planets are in the process of forming and see how it's working. And does it behave the way that your hypothesis says it does? Your hypothesis says if a planet forms, it forms in this way. And so you'd be able to observe and test that. Okay. Either by seeing it or seeing the results of that happen. Because sometimes you say if it forms this way, there's got to be this byproduct, and you can go look for the byproduct. A model is a mathematical description here of something. It's not exactly how it works, but it's an idea. For example, the Bohr model of the atom, where you have the nucleus and you have the electrons going around out here. Now, that's not exactly how the atom works, but if you go through all the math of that, it works very close with how the atom really does work. And so that's a mathematical model. And from that, you can have a hypothesis saying, if this is what's going on with atoms, I expect if I hit it with light, I knock the electron loose because that's the outer part. In fact, that's exactly what happens. That's actually the basis of how digital cameras work. So it's based on that model. A theory is not the same as a hypothesis. A theory is a set of models and other ideas you come up with that have stood up to testing. Hypothesis is just an idea. Now, I know in layman's language, hypothesis or idea or theory all kind of mean the same thing. But no, really in science, a theory is really a much more robust sort of thing. It's like we call the theory of gravity. That doesn't mean I think there's gravity. The theory of gravity is the mathematical description as to how gravity actually works. Okay, so it's all the science, and the theory is the body of all the science that explains how it works mathematically. So that's a little bit different use of the language than a lot of people are customary. A hypothesis, this is your idea. It needs to be based on previous work, so you don't just come with hypothesis off of nothing. You say, okay, I think I understand how things work, therefore, I think gravity makes things go down, so my hypothesis, if I drop something, it falls. It has to be testable either by observing something that's happening out there anyway or observing the effect of something. You don't even have to see it fall. You can just look at you drop a plate, a ceramic plate. You don't have to see it fall. You can see all the bits of ceramic plate splattered all over the kitchen floor to know that it fell. Okay, so it can be an indirect observation, and that's still a testable hypothesis. An empirical hypothesis is actually based on something that you see. Oh, I see something happening, so I'm going to make a hypothesis about that. A deductive hypothesis is, in some cases, a little more powerful. It is based on a theoretical work or a model, and it says, okay, if our understanding of how gravity works is correct, if something happens, then this other thing ought to happen. And so that's deductive hypothesis. And both of these are both scientific ways of thinking about things. Something else you're going to need here for the class, the Planosphere, or I sometimes call it a star wheel. You can order it online. It tells you where it is in the syllabus. You can buy it from the bookstore. You need a calculator, a scientific calculator, because it has to do that scientific notation. It doesn't have to be super fancy calculator. The one I got is about $10. You can get cheaper than that, but I wanted one with a little solar cell so I don't have to keep changing batteries. And you need a red filtered flashlight. I'll talk more about that later when we talk about the labs, but if you go outside at night and look at something, like if you take your star wheel out at night and you want to look at it, if you shine a bright flashlight on it, you're going to lose your ability to see in the dark. So you need a red flashlight. and you can get a red flashlight, either by buying one that has a red filter like they sell for hunting and outdoorsmen and so forth, or you can buy just get a regular flashlight and put like cellophane or something, something red on the front of it to make a red lens. Or there's actually an app you can download for your phone. For my Android phone, there's something just called Red Light that turns the screen into a red flashlight, and that works. If you don't use a red light, you lose your dark adaptation, and so if you look at your planosphere, remember when you first walk outside, it's dark at night. You can't see anything. You don't see any stars. You don't see anything around you. But if you wait for a few minutes, you realize you can actually see an awful lot in the dark, and you can see a whole lot more stars. So if you shine a bright light on that, you quit being able to see the stars. You got to wait another 15, 20 minutes until your eye gets used to the dark again. And so that's why the red lights become very useful for astronomers. So those are some other things you're going to need. You will also need a protractor and a ruler, because we'll have several labs in which we're going to need to use protractors and rulers. And again, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Again, watch the initial video that I originally had, the introduction video, that gives you more information.